Why do we allow people to build on floodplains, for example?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to note that what we're seeing these days, I think, is largely legacy risk, buildings that were put up many years ago. But we do still see some construction on floodplains or encroaching, getting near to floodplains. And I think it's because municipalities really don't have a lot of skin in the game. And what I mean by that is they benefit when a new subdivision goes up, for example. They get all kinds of fees and taxes and that sort of thing. But when it hits the fan and disaster assistance has to come into play, they don't have to pony up any money. So I think there's some moral hazard there.
Should we be taking a different approach? There are a couple of questions for me. One is, should we start, and I think this was really raised by the Premier in Quebec, about whether we should start compensating people to move them out of areas that are prone to chronic flooding, first of all. And second of all, whether we need to be far more restrictive in where we allow people to build. But first on the issue of relocating, do you think that's what we have to do?
It's what we have to do. There's no question about it. We were, I think, talking about this 2 years ago, and here we are again. And we may very well be talking about it next year or 2 years from now or 3 years from now, and that's the thing. It's going to happen over and over and over again. Rivers flood. That's what they do. And what we have done is we've essentially built in the river. A floodplain is part of the river. And so we either pay now a little bit or pay again and again and again, and it makes more sense, I think, to get people out of there permanently.
But, the reality, if you have a home on, on waterfront, it will elevate the value. People love to live along water. So relocating people from flood-prone areas could be extraordinarily expensive.
It could be, but if you add up the cost of continuously paying to restore these properties again and again and again, that gets up there as well. So does constructing flood infrastructure. It's very costly as well, and you have to maintain that infrastructure or else it will fail. You look at the long term, and I think buyouts are almost always the better way to go. And there have been something like over 50,000 buyouts in the U.S. over the years, and only about 8 or so in Canada. So there are countries like the Netherlands and like the U.S. that buy people out on a regular basis, and it works. It's basic risk management. The first rule of risk management is to remove the risk or remove the victim from the risk, and so this is pretty basic stuff.
The rubber really hits the road, though. If you've got a resident who says, "I like my home," you're not going to be able to give me the kind of money I would need to enjoy similar life somewhere else. So I'm going to stay. Does that therefore necessitate tough love, where they're informed simply that there'll be no municipal, maybe no provincial, maybe no federal support if flooding strikes again?
That's right, and we're starting to see that now. 2 years ago I was talking about this very same stuff, and the politicians weren't. This time around it's different. We're hearing from the federal public safety minister exactly what you're saying. We're hearing from the Premier of Quebec exactly what you're saying, and even yesterday afternoon, the Premier of New Brunswick. So the money tap may be turned off or may be limited, and I think we'll see more buyouts, and where we don't get cooperation, they may have to be mandatory.
Boy, that's going to be tough in many situations, I suspect. Should we be a lot tougher in allowing mass urban development, some of which may tip into traditional flood areas? I know we've experienced a bit of that in the past here.
We have to be very fierce on this. We're pretty good at it in Ontario with the conservation authorities. Learned a lot from Hurricane Hazel in 1954. We still get a little bit of encroachment into the floodplain. I read about one small city in Ontario just the other day where a new subdivision is getting close. We do a good job. We could do better, and we need to do better in places like Quebec and New Brunswick and elsewhere. So there's no question about it. We have to be fierce on this because the future is going to mean more and bigger floods. Yeah,
I agree with you. Maybe now is not the time to talk about it because those most affected obviously are dealing with the immediacy of the moment. But at a certain point, we really have to put it to people that if you still want to live here, along a river like the Ottawa River that does flood every few years, then you're going to have to either accept the consequences or relocate.